A millionaire saw a mother crying as her house burned down. What she said about her children left him speechless. And before we continue, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. Enjoy the story. The city was alive with chaos that night. The flashing lights of fire trucks and police cars illuminated the dark streets of Los Angeles, casting eerie shadows on the crowd that had gathered to watch an old house burn. The orange glow of the flames flickered against the night sky, consuming everything in their path, while firefighters shouted commands and struggled to control the inferno. Amidst the chaos stood a woman, her silhouette barely visible through the thick smoke and haze. Kneeling on the cracked pavement, she sobbed into her hands, her entire body trembling with anguish. The voices of concerned neighbors and onlookers filled the air, but her grief seemed to drown out everything else. Her despair was palpable, a raw wound laid bare for everyone to see. Ethan Carter hadn't planned on stopping that night. He was on his way home from a late meeting, the comforting hum of his sleek black Tesla filling the otherwise quiet streets. But as he rounded a corner, the glow of the fire caught his attention. At first, it was just a distant shimmer, a flash of light against the skyline. But as he drove closer, the scene unfolded in horrifying clarity. Ethan wasn't the type to linger in crowds or involve himself in other people's problems. His life was meticulously planned, every minute accounted for in the pursuit of success. But something about the sight of the woman, her silhouette framed by the raging flames, her sobs shaking her frail body, made him pull over. Against his better judgment, he stepped out of his car and approached the scene. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning wood. As Ethan walked closer, he could see the devastation more clearly. Firefighters were battling the blaze with everything they had, but it was clear they were losing. The house was old, its wooden frame no match for the relentless flames. Ethan's eyes were drawn to the woman again. Her clothes were tattered and soot-streaked, her face hidden behind trembling hands. Nearby, a beat-up sedan was parked haphazardly on the curb, and inside, two small faces peeked out from the backseat. The children, wide-eyed and clutching each other, watched the fire with a mixture of fear and confusion. Their innocence struck Ethan like a blow. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wasn't a firefighter or a hero. He was just a businessman, a millionaire, no less, whose life had been carefully built to avoid chaos. But the sight of those children, their tiny hands pressed against the car window, stirred something deep within him. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached the woman cautiously. "Ma'am," he said gently, his voice cutting through the noise. "Are you hurt? Is there anything I can do?" The woman looked up, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the orange glow of the fire. Her eyes were red, not just from crying, but from the smoke that surrounded them. "My children," she choked, her voice barely audible. "They're all I have. Everything we owned. It's gone. All of it." Ethan crouched down to meet her at eye level, his heart clenching at the despair in her voice. "Are they safe?" he asked, motioning toward the car. She nodded weakly, her gaze darting toward the vehicle. "They're in the car. I couldn't." Her words broke off into another sob, her hands trembling as they covered her face again. Ethan glanced toward the car, where the children were still watching the fire with wide, frightened eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't just a house fire. This was a family losing everything. "Listen," Ethan said softly but firmly. "Let's get you and the kids somewhere safe. You shouldn't be out here in this. Do you have somewhere to go?" The woman shook her head, her sobs subsiding slightly as she looked back at him. "No," she whispered. "We don't have anywhere. This was all we had." Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. He wasn't used to situations like this. His world was one of boardrooms and stock prices, not burning homes and shattered lives. But he couldn't just walk away. Not now. All right, he said, standing and offering her his hand. Come with me. I'll get you somewhere safe for the night. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan paused, unsure of how to answer. Finally, he said, because someone once helped me when I needed it most. Let's just say, I know what it's like to lose everything. With a nod, the woman took his hand and rose to her feet. Her movements were shaky, her body clearly exhausted from the night's events. Ethan helped her over to the car, where the children watched him with wide, curious eyes. Hi there, Ethan said softly, crouching down to their level. Your mom's going to come with me. We want to get you guys somewhere safe, okay? The children didn't respond, but their eyes followed his every move. Ethan opened the car door and helped them out, their small hands clutching at their mothers as if afraid to let go. As Ethan led them back to his Tesla, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of déjà vu. The scene reminded him of a night he had spent years trying to forget, a night when his own family had lost everything. He had buried those memories deep, but now they were rising to the surface, raw and painful. As the car pulled away from the scene, Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman sat silently in the passenger seat, her hands gripping her knees. In the back, the children huddled together, their heads resting against each other as exhaustion overcame their fear. Ethan didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't have a plan, and for the first time in years, he felt completely out of his depth. But as the burning house disappeared in the distance, one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away from this family. Not now. Not ever. The early morning sun filtered through the windows of the hotel lobby, casting soft golden light across the room. Ethan Carter sat in one of the plush chairs, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. His mind was a whirlwind, replaying the events of the night before. The woman's tear-streaked face, the terrified eyes of her children, the roaring flames that had consumed everything they owned. It was all etched into his memory. He wasn't supposed to be here. His schedule for today had been clear. An early meeting with investors, followed by a business lunch, and then a quiet evening in his penthouse. But as he sat there, staring into the dark liquid in his cup, none of that seemed to matter anymore. Mr. Carter, a hesitant voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan looked up to see Maria, the woman from a fire, standing near the lobby entrance. She looked slightly more composed than the night before, though the weight of her exhaustion still clung to her. She had borrowed a plain hoodie and jeans from the hotel's donation closet, the clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her children, Noah and Lily, stood close to her, their small hands clutching the fabric of her hoodie as though it were a lifeline. Ethan stood, setting his cup down on the table. "Good morning, Maria," he said, his voice warm but measured. "How are you and the kids holding up?" Maria glanced at Noah and Lily, who were looking around the lobby with wide, curious eyes. "They're trying to be brave," she said softly, "but I'm not sure how long that'll last. They keep asking me what's next, and I don't have an answer for them." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, blinking back tears. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. He had seen that look before, in his own mother's eyes. The memory hit him like a tidal wave, unearthing emotions he hadn't confronted in years. "Maria," he began gently, motioning for her to sit. "Let's figure this out together. You don't have to do this alone." Once they were seated, Maria's hands fidgeted with a napkin on the table, her eyes fixed downward. Ethan watched her carefully, recognizing the telltale signs of someone holding back, someone overwhelmed by a situation far beyond their control. "I don't mean to pry," Ethan said, leaning forward slightly. "I need to understand what happened before the fire. You mentioned a phone call last night. Can you tell me more about that?" Maria hesitated, her grip tightening on the napkin. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was a warning. They said I needed to leave town. That if I didn't, there would be consequences. Ethan's brows furrowed. Who are they? Maria shook her head. I don't know exactly. My husband. He got involved with some dangerous people before he died. I thought it ended with him. But last night proved otherwise. She paused, her voice trembling as she continued. I didn't take the warning seriously. I thought it was just empty threats. But then, the fire, it wasn't an accident. I know it wasn't. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't just a tragic case of bad luck. Maria and her children were being targeted. He felt his jaw clench as anger simmered beneath the surface. Whoever was behind this had destroyed her home and terrified her children, and they weren't going to stop unless someone stepped in. Do you know who these people are? Ethan asked, his tone steady but firm. Maria hesitated again, then nodded slowly. There's a name, she said quietly. Victor Moreno. My husband mentioned him once, but I never knew the details. I didn't want to know. Ethan leaned back, the name burning itself into his memory. Victor Moreno. It wasn't a name he recognized, but it sounded like trouble. Ethan's mind raced, already forming a plan. He had resources, connections, and he wasn't about to let Maria face this alone. The sound of laughter pulled Ethan's attention back to the present. Noah and Lily were giggling as they played with a small toy car that one of the hotel staff had given them. The sight was a stark contrast to the terror he had seen in their eyes the night before. They're resilient, Ethan said, nodding toward the children. Maria followed his gaze, her expression softening. They have to be, she said quietly. I've tried to protect them from so much, but now, I don't know how. Ethan's voice softened. You've done everything you could, Maria, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. Maria turned back to him, her eyes brimming with tears. Why are you doing this for us? She asked, her voice trembling. You don't even know us. Ethan hesitated, the question hitting him in a place he rarely let anyone see. Finally, he said, because someone once helped me when I needed it most, and because I see in you what I saw in my own mother, the strength to keep going, no matter what. I can't just walk away from that. Maria looked at him for a long moment, her expression a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what we would have done without you. After a few more moments of quiet conversation, Ethan stood. I'll take care of the hotel arrangements for now, he said. But we need to figure out a plan for what's next. My lawyer can help us look into Moreno and see what we're dealing with. Maria nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile light in the overwhelming darkness. As Ethan left the hotel that morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something much bigger than he had anticipated. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't let Maria and her children face it alone, not while he had the power to help. The hum of the hotel's air conditioning was a quiet backdrop to the sound of Noah and Lily's laughter as they played on the carpeted floor of the suite. Ethan sat across from Maria at the small dining table, his laptop open and a notepad filled with scrawled notes beside it. He had spent the better part of the morning on the phone, making calls and arranging resources to help Maria and her children. But now, it was time to dig deeper. Maria sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Despite the new clothes Ethan had arranged for her and the warm meal she'd shared with her children, the weight of her situation hadn't lifted. Her eyes darted nervously to Noah and Lily every few moments, as if to reassure herself that they were still there, still safe. Ethan broke the silence, his tone gentle but firm. Maria, I've been speaking with my lawyer and a few contacts who might be able to help. But to protect you and the kids, I need to know everything. No detail is too small. Maria hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. Finally, she nodded, taking a deep breath. I told you about the call I got before the fire, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't tell you everything. The man on the phone, he didn't just threaten me. He told me that if I didn't leave town, they'd come for my children. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists under the table. And you're sure this has to do with your husband's past? Maria nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. Daniel was a good man, she said softly, but he made mistakes, big ones. After Noah was born, we started struggling financially. He said he'd found a way to make extra money, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. I didn't ask too many questions. I was too afraid of the answers. She paused, her voice breaking. After he died, I found out he'd been running errands for Victor Moreno, a name I'd only heard in whispers. I thought it ended when Daniel was gone, but I was wrong. They kept calling, threatening. I thought ignoring them would make them go away, but all it did was make them angrier. Ethan leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Maria, why didn't you go to the police? Maria let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. The police. Do you think they care about people like me? I'm just another name on a report that gets buried in paperwork. And even if they did listen, Moreno's people have connections everywhere. I didn't know who to trust. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding her fear. Moreno wasn't just a thug. He was calculated, and his network was extensive. But that only fueled Ethan's resolve. If Maria couldn't fight back alone, he would fight for her. Noah's giggle broke the tension, drawing both their gazes to the children. Lily had managed to balance a spoon on her nose, and Noah clapped in delight. Maria's face softened, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite the tears in her eyes. They don't understand what's happening, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And I want to keep it that way. They've already lost so much. I just want them to feel safe. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew that kind of love, the fierce, unyielding determination to protect those you cared about, no matter the cost. It was the same love his mother had shown him after their own lives had been torn apart. They will be safe, Ethan said firmly, his voice cutting through her doubt. I promise you, Maria, I'll do whatever it takes to keep them out of harm's way. Maria looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of hesitation. All she saw was determination. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. You don't even know us. Ethan hesitated, the question hitting a nerve. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as memories he had buried long ago began to resurface. When I was 10, he began, his voice low, my family lost everything. A fire took our home, and my mother and I spent months in shelters. We were invisible to most people, just another tragedy in a city full of them. But one person saw us. He gave us a place to stay, a chance to start over. That one act of kindness changed everything for us. He met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. Helping you? It feels like I'm paying that kindness forward. And maybe I see a bit of my mother in you. You remind me of her strength, her resilience. Maria's lip trembled as she absorbed his words. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile, precious thing she hadn't dared to cling to before. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. For everything. Ethan spent the rest of the day making arrangements. He contacted a security firm to provide temporary surveillance for the hotel, ensuring Maria and the children wouldn't be left vulnerable. He also instructed Mark, his lawyer, to begin investigating Moreno's network. Every call, every favor he pulled, brought him closer to a solution. That evening, he returned to the suite with a bag of takeout and a few small toys for Noah and Lily. The children's eyes lit up as he handed them their gifts, their joy a stark contrast to the fear they had faced the night before. Maria watched from the corner of the room, her arms crossed as she leaned against the wall. You didn't have to do that, she said, though her tone was more grateful than admonishing. Ethan shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I wanted to. They deserve a little happiness. Maria's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, the tension between them eased. They were two people from completely different worlds, brought together by tragedy. And yet, in that moment, they weren't so different after all. As the children fell asleep, Maria and Ethan sat in the quiet living room, the soft glow of the table lamp casting long shadows across the walls. "What happens next?" Maria asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan exhaled slowly, his expression serious. "Next, we figure out how to stop Moreno. I'll do whatever it takes, but it's going to take time. For now, you and the kids stay here. I'll make sure you're protected." Maria nodded, her trust in him growing with every passing moment. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you," she said softly. "You don't have to," Ethan replied. "Just focus on your kids. That's all the thanks I need." As the night deepened, Ethan left the hotel, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let Maria and her children face it alone. The shopping plaza was bustling with life as Ethan's car pulled into the parking lot. The hum of activity, the chatter of shoppers, the beeping of car alarms, the faint strains of music from the stores was a stark contrast to the quiet tension inside the vehicle. Maria sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, while Noah and Lily gazed wide-eyed at the colorful storefronts outside. Ethan turned off the engine and glanced at Maria. "I thought the kids could use a distraction," he said, his voice calm but encouraging. "A little normalcy might help them feel safer." Maria hesitated, her gaze darting from the bustling plaza to her children in the backseat. This is too much," she said softly. "You've already done so much for us. I don't know if I can accept more." Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "Maria, this isn't just about what you need. It's about what they need," he said, nodding toward Noah and Lily. "And right now, they need to feel like kids again." Maria looked back at her children, who were staring eagerly at a store with toys displayed in the window. Their excitement was infectious, and despite the weight of her worries, a small smile tugged at her lips. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Ethan." Inside the plaza, the children's laughter echoed as they explored the aisles of a brightly lit store. Noah was fascinated by a set of building blocks, while Lily clutched a stuffed animal tightly to her chest. Maria trailed behind them, her movements tentative, as if afraid to disturb the fragile moment of joy. Ethan watched from a distance, his hands in his pockets. It was the first time he had seen the children truly smile, and it struck a chord deep within him. He remembered the rare moments of happiness he had shared with his mother after they lost their home, moments that had felt like a lifeline amidst the chaos. "You've done a lot for us," Maria said quietly, coming to stand beside him. Her voice carried a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't know why you're helping, but I'm grateful." Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "I told you," he said. "Someone once helped me when I needed it most. I'm just paying it forward." Maria studied him for a moment, her brows furrowing slightly. "There's more to it than that, isn't there?" she asked. "You didn't just stop to help a stranger. This feels personal." Ethan hesitated, the question catching him off guard. For a moment, he considered brushing it off, but something about Maria's earnest gaze made him pause. "It is personal," he admitted finally. "You and your kids. You reminded me of my own mother and me, after we lost everything. I know how hard it is to rebuild, and I don't want you to go through that alone." Maria's eyes softened, her lips parting, as if to respond, but she was interrupted by Noah tugging at her sleeve. "Mom, look at this," he exclaimed, holding up a toy with wide-eyed excitement. Maria smiled, brushing away her tears before crouching to meet her son's gaze. "That's wonderful, Noah," she said, her voice warm. "Maybe we can get it for you." Ethan stepped forward, crouching beside Noah. "I think it's a great choice," he said with a grin. "Go ahead, pick something for your sister too." The small family left the store with bags in hand, the children's joy radiating like sunlight. Ethan carried most of the bags, watching as Maria held onto Noah and Lily's hands. For a brief moment, the weight of their situation seemed to lift. Over lunch at a quiet cafe in the plaza, the children were engrossed in their new toys while Maria and Ethan sat across from each other. The tension that had lingered between them was replaced by a cautious sense of trust. "Maria," Ethan began, breaking the comfortable silence. "We need to talk about what happens next. I've been looking into Victor Moreno, and it's clear he's not going to back down easily. But to figure out how to handle this, I need to know everything about your husband, about Moreno, about what you're facing." Maria's smile faded, her hands wrapping around the coffee cup in front of her. She stared down at the table, her shoulders stiffening. "I've already told you everything I know," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head gently. "Not everything," he said. "I can see it, Maria. You're holding back. I understand why. But if I'm going to help you, I need the full picture." Maria hesitated, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the cup tighter. "It's not that I don't trust you," she said after a long pause. "It's just, talking about it makes it real. And once it's real, there's no going back." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady but kind. "I know it's hard," he said, "but I promise you, whatever you say stays between us. And no matter what, I'll do everything I can to protect you and your kids." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. Taking a shaky breath, she began to speak. "Daniel, my husband, he wasn't just doing errands for Moreno. He was involved in something bigger. Smuggling, I think. He told me it was just to pay off debts, but I knew there was more to it." Her voice trembled as she continued. "After he died, I thought it was over. I thought Moreno would forget about us. But then the calls started. Threats, demands. I ignored them, hoping they'd stop. But last night, the fire. It wasn't just a warning. It was a message." Ethan's chest tightened as her words sank in. This wasn't just a case of bad luck or coincidence. Moreno was making sure Maria knew she couldn't escape him. "Do you have any proof?" Ethan asked carefully. "Anything that could tie Moreno to what happened?" Maria shook her head. "Nothing concrete," she said. "Just the calls. But I know it was him." Ethan nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. He needed to gather more information, to find a way to protect Maria and her children from Moreno's reach. But for now, he focused on calming her fears. "You don't have to face this alone," he said firmly. "I have people who can help. And I promise you, Maria, I won't let him hurt you or your kids." Maria looked at him, her tear-streaked face etched with a mixture of fear and hope. "Why are you doing this for us?" she asked softly. "You don't owe us anything." Ethan hesitated, then said, "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I know what it's like to need someone to believe in you." As they left the cafe, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the plaza. Noah and Lily skipped ahead, their laughter filling the air. Maria walked beside Ethan, her shoulders a little less tense. For the first time, in what felt like forever, Maria allowed herself to hope. And Ethan, watching the light return to her eyes, knew he had made the right choice. The golden hues of the late afternoon sun streamed into the hotel lobby as Ethan walked in, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His conversation with Mark Benson, his trusted lawyer, had been intense, the stakes higher than anything Ethan had faced in years. He ended the call with a heavy sigh, shoving the phone into his pocket as he approached Maria, who was seated in a corner with Noah and Lily. Maria looked up as he neared, her eyes tired but grateful. "You're back," she said softly. "Did you find anything?" Ethan nodded, though his expression was serious. "I've been talking to my lawyer," he began, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "We've confirmed that Victor Moreno is behind everything you've described. He's not just dangerous. He's calculated, well-connected, and relentless." Maria's face paled, her hand instinctively reaching for Noah, who was playing with Lily on the floor. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means we need to be smart," Ethan replied, leaning forward. "I've already taken some precautions. I've hired private security to monitor the hotel and ensure no one comes near you or the kids. But this is only the first step. We need to think long-term." Maria let out a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup in front of her. "I thought this was over when Daniel—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought we could finally move on." Ethan softened his tone, sensing her rising panic. "Maria, this isn't your fault. You did what you could to protect your family. Now it's my turn to help." Maria looked back at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and doubt. "Why are you so willing to do all this?" she asked. "You've already done so much for us." Most people wouldn't have even stopped that night. Ethan hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on him. "Because I've been where you are," he said finally. "I know what it's like to feel helpless, to wonder how you're going to keep going. Someone helped me once, and it changed everything. Now, I have the means to help you. It's as simple as that." Maria's lip trembled, and she quickly looked down at her lap. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Ethan said firmly. "Just focus on staying strong for your kids. That's what matters most." After a brief pause, Ethan's voice turned more serious. "There's one more thing," he said. "Mark found something, a vulnerability in Moreno's operation. He has a shipment coming into the city tonight. It's valuable, and if it goes smoothly, it'll solidify his power. But if it's disrupted, it could give us leverage." Maria's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. "No," she said, her voice rising. "Ethan, you can't get involved with him. It's too dangerous. He's not someone you can reason with." Ethan raised a hand, his expression calm but determined. "Maria, I'm not planning to reason with him. I'm planning to make sure he leaves you and your kids alone for good. If disrupting this shipment is the only way to get his attention, then that's what I'll do." Maria's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles turning white. "But what if something happens to you? I couldn't live with myself if—" "Nothing's going to happen to me," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady. "I've dealt with difficult people before. This isn't new territory for me." Maria looked at him, her eyes pleading. "You don't have to do this. There has to be another way." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Maria, I promised you I'd protect you and your kids. This is how I keep that promise." As the evening approached, Ethan made his final preparations. He called Mark again to confirm the details of the shipment and arranged for his security team to keep a close watch on the hotel while he was gone. Before leaving, he stopped by Maria's suite to check on her one last time. Maria opened the door, her face drawn with worry. "Ethan, are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am," he said, his tone firm but kind. "You and the kids stay here. Don't open the door for anyone except the security team. I'll be back before you know it." Noah and Lily peeked out from behind Maria, their innocent faces a painful reminder of why he was doing this. Ethan crouched down to their level, offering them a reassuring smile. "You two take care of your mom, all right," he said gently. "I'll see you soon." The children nodded, their wide eyes filled with trust. Maria, however, looked like she was about to say something more, but Ethan gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning and walking away. The docks were a stark contrast to the lively plaza Ethan had taken Maria and the kids to earlier. The air was damp and cold, the faint smell of salt water mingling with the metallic tang of machinery. Shadows loomed large under the dim lights, and the distant sound of waves lapping against the pier only added to the tension. Ethan parked his car a safe distance away and approached on foot, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't a stranger to high-stakes situations, but this was different. This wasn't about business deals or boardroom negotiations. This was about lives. From the shadows emerged Victor Moreno, his sharp features illuminated by the faint glow of a nearby floodlight. He was flanked by two men, their imposing figures a silent warning. Moreno's expression was one of amusement as he spotted Ethan. "Mr. Carter," Moreno said smoothly, his voice dripping with mockery. "I didn't expect to see you here. What brings a man of your stature to my humble operations?" Ethan straightened his posture, meeting Moreno's gaze without flinching. "I came to make sure this ends tonight," he said firmly. "You leave Maria and her kids alone, and I won't interfere with your shipment." Moreno chuckled, his laughter low and menacing. "You think you can dictate terms to me?" he asked, stepping closer. "You're in my world now, Carter. And in my world, leverage is earned, not handed over." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I'm not here to play games," he said. "If you want your shipment to go smoothly, you'll leave them alone. No threats, no more fires. Do we have a deal?" Moreno studied him for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally, he smirked. "All right, Carter," he said. "You've got yourself a deal. But remember, cross me, and you'll regret it." As Ethan left the docks, his mind raced with the weight of what had just happened. He had stood toe-to-toe with a man like Moreno and walked away unscathed. But the night wasn't over, and the consequences of his actions had yet to unfold. The night at the docks was heavy with tension. A dense fog rolled in from the harbor, clinging to the ground like a ghostly veil. The rhythmic lap of waves against the wooden pilings was the only sound, apart from the faint hum of engines in the distance. Ethan Carter stood near a stack of rusted shipping containers, his breath visible in the cold air. Every muscle in his body was taut, his senses hyper-alert. He had thought about the risks of being here, the danger, the stakes, but nothing could have prepared him for the weight of the moment. The reality of standing on the edge of a criminal world hit him like a freight train. But for Maria and her children, this was the only choice. From the shadows emerged Victor Moreno, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings. He was flanked by two men, their hulking frames and stone-cold expressions broadcasting that they were more than just bodyguards. Ethan straightened his posture, his jaw set as he watched the trio approach. "Ethan Carter," Moreno said smoothly, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and menace. "You've decided to step into my world. I hope you're prepared for what that means." Ethan didn't flinch, his gaze locked with Moreno's. "I'm here to ensure Maria and her kids are left alone," he said firmly. "That's the only thing that matters to me." Moreno chuckled, pulling a cigarette from his pocket and lighting it with a flick of his silver lighter. The orange glow briefly illuminated his sharp features. "You're a bold man, Carter. I respect that. But boldness without leverage, that's just stupidity. Tell me, why should I care about your demands?" Ethan took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. "Because I can make this worth your while," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I have resources, money, connections. If you leave them alone, I'll ensure your operations stay under the radar. But if you don't, I'll use every connection I have to make your life difficult." Moreno's expression darkened, the amusement fading from his eyes. He stepped closer, the smoke from his cigarette curling in the air between them. "You're making a dangerous gamble, Carter. Do you really think you can play in my world and come out unscathed?" Ethan held his ground, refusing to show even a flicker of fear. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect them," he said. "If that means going up against you, so be it." Moreno studied him for a long moment, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, he smirked and flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushing it beneath his heel. "Fine," he said. "You've got yourself a deal. For now. But if you cross me, Carter, you'll regret it." Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted nearby. Headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the fog, followed by the sound of tires screeching. A black SUV pulled up, and from it emerged a group of armed men. They weren't Moreno's people. Their appearance was a clear challenge to his authority. One of Moreno's guards leaned in, whispering something in his ear. Moreno's smirk disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "Stay here," he said to Ethan, his tone low and commanding. "This doesn't concern you." Ethan's pulse quickened as he watched the rival group approach. Their leader, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, his weapon drawn. "Moreno," the man sneered. "You've been playing in our territory for too long. Time to pay the price." Ethan instinctively stepped back, his heart pounding as the situation escalated. Gunfire erupted without warning, the sharp cracks echoing across the docks. Moreno's men returned fire, the clash turning the quiet harbor into a war zone. Ethan dove behind a stack of crates, his chest heaving as he tried to process the chaos unfolding around him. He wasn't built for this world of violence and crime, but there was no turning back now. He peeked around the edge of the crates, watching as Moreno's men systematically pushed back the attackers. Amidst the chaos, Moreno seemed unfazed, barking orders to his men with calm authority. Ethan couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for the man's composure, even as bullets flew inches from where he stood. After what felt like an eternity, the gunfire subsided. The rival group retreated, their SUV speeding away into the night. Moreno's men quickly regrouped, checking for injuries and securing the area. Moreno himself walked over to Ethan, a faint smirk returning to his face. "Well, Carter," he said, brushing imaginary dust off his suit, "you survived your first taste of my world. Congratulations." Ethan rose slowly, his legs shaky but his resolve intact. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "Our deal still stands. Maria and her kids are off limits." Moreno nodded, his expression unreadable. "A deal's a deal," he said. "But let me give you some advice, Carter. Stay out of my business from now on. You're not cut out for this." Ethan didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, his heart still pounding as he made his way back to his car. As he drove away from the docks, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving him drained and shaken. The reality of what he had just done settled heavily on his shoulders. By the time he reached the hotel, the first hints of dawn were beginning to break over the horizon. The soft glow of the sunrise cast long shadows across the city, a reminder that the night was over. But the fight wasn't. Ethan parked his car and sat in silence for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He had made a deal with a dangerous man, stepped into a world he didn't belong to, and risked everything for a family he barely knew. But as he thought of Maria and her children, safe and unaware of the chaos he had faced, he knew he would do it all again. The early morning light poured through the windows of the hotel lobby as Ethan walked in, his steps heavy with exhaustion. The events of the night at the docks played over and over in his mind. The gunfire, the chaos, Moreno's sharp gaze as he cemented their fragile deal. For a man who had built his life on precision and order, the unpredictability of the last few days had left him shaken. Maria was waiting for him in the corner of the lounge, her posture tense. She rose quickly when she saw him, her face etched with worry. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with equal parts relief and fear. "You're back." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "I told you I would be," he replied. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of fatigue that he couldn't hide. Maria searched his face, her brow furrowing. "What happened? Did Moreno agree?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes," he said finally. "For now, you and the kids are safe. He gave me his word that he won't come after you." Maria's shoulders sagged with relief, but her eyes remained wary. "But at what cost?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Ethan, what did you have to do?" Ethan gestured for her to sit, lowering himself into the chair across from her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and took a deep breath. "I made a deal," he said slowly. "I had to ensure that one of his shipments wasn't disrupted. In exchange, he agreed to leave you alone." Maria's eyes widened, her hands clutching the edge of the table. You went to the docks," she whispered. "Ethan, that's risky, dangerous." Ethan finished for her, his tone calm but firm. "I know, but it worked. He has no reason to come after you anymore." Maria shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You shouldn't have done that. You put yourself in danger. For us." Ethan leaned back, his gaze steady. "I told you I'd protect you," he said simply. "This was the only way to make sure you and the kids were safe. And I don't regret it." The sound of laughter broke the tension, drawing their attention to the corner of the room where Noah and Lily were playing with a set of building blocks Ethan had bought for them. The innocence of their joy was a stark contrast to the heaviness of the conversation. Maria wiped her eyes, her voice softening. "They don't even know how close we came to losing everything," she said. "And I want to keep it that way." Ethan's chest tightened at her words. He knew that feeling all too well. The desperate need to shield those you love from the harshness of the world. "They don't have to know," he said. "All that matters is that they're safe now." Maria nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "And what about you?" she asked. "You've done so much for us, but what happens to you now? Are you in danger because of this?" Ethan hesitated, the question hitting a nerve he wasn't ready to confront. "I'll be fine," he said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "Moreno and I have an understanding. As long as I don't interfere in his business, he has no reason to come after me." Maria frowned, clearly unconvinced. "But what if he changes his mind? What if this isn't over?" Ethan gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Then I'll deal with it when the time comes," he said. "Right now, the important thing is that you and the kids are safe. Focus on that." Over the next few hours, Ethan worked tirelessly to put plans in place for Maria's future. He contacted the foundation he had arranged to support her, ensuring that they would provide housing, financial assistance, and counseling. He also reached out to a local private school, securing scholarships for Noah and Lily to give them the stability they deserved. By the time he returned to the suite, Maria was sitting by the window, gazing out at the city. She turned when he entered, her expression unreadable. "You've done more for us than I could have ever imagined," she said softly. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Ethan replied, setting a folder down on the table. "This has all the details for the house I've arranged for you. It's in a safe neighborhood, fully furnished, and ready for you to move in." Maria's eyes widened, and she quickly picked up the folder, flipping through the papers. "Ethan, this is too much," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't accept this." "You can," Ethan said firmly. "And you will. This is a fresh start for you and the kids. You deserve it." Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks as she closed the folder and looked up at him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why go to such lengths for us?" Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before meeting hers again. "Because someone once did the same for me," he said quietly. "When I was a kid, my mother and I were in a situation a lot like yours. A stranger stepped in and gave us a second chance. This is my way of paying it forward." Maria wiped her eyes, a small, shaky smile forming on her lips. "You've given us more than a second chance, Ethan," she said. "You've given us hope. And that's something I thought we'd lost forever." As the sun began to set, Ethan walked Maria and the children out to his car. The drive to their new home was quiet, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air. When they arrived, Maria gasped softly as she stepped out and saw the house. A modest but charming home with a small yard and a welcoming porch. "This is it," Ethan said, handing her the keys. "Your new beginning." Noah and Lily ran toward the house, their laughter echoing as they explored their new space. Maria stood on the porch, her eyes glistening as she turned to Ethan. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Ethan smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in days. "Take care of yourself, Maria," he said, "and take care of them." As he walked back to his car, Ethan felt a mix of relief and lingering uncertainty. He had done everything he could to protect Maria and her children, but the cost of his choices weighed heavily on him. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, he allowed himself to savor the small victory. The fight wasn't over, but tonight, it felt like a step towards something better. The morning sun bathed the small house in a warm golden glow, casting soft shadows on the modest yard where Noah and Lily played. Their laughter filled the crisp air, a sound so pure and joyful that it momentarily masked the scars of the past days. Maria stood on the porch, her arms crossed as she watched her children, a faint smile on her lips. For the first time in weeks, the tight knot of fear in her chest had begun to loosen. Ethan pulled up in his sleek black car, stepping out with a casual confidence that belied the exhaustion he felt. He carried a stack of documents in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other, a symbol of his ongoing commitment to helping Maria rebuild. As he walked up the driveway, Maria turned to greet him, her smile widening. "You didn't have to come all the way out here," she said, though her voice carried a note of gratitude. Ethan shrugged, setting the bag of groceries down on the porch. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed," he said. "And besides, I thought it might be nice to see the kids enjoying themselves." Maria glanced back at Noah and Lily, her eyes softening. "They've been through so much," she said quietly. "Seeing them like this, it feels like a miracle." Ethan nodded, his gaze following hers. "They're resilient," he said. "That's a testament to you, Maria. You've kept them safe, even when everything was against you." Maria's smile faltered slightly, a hint of sadness creeping into her expression. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "You gave us a chance to start over, a chance I didn't think we'd ever have." Inside the house, the warmth of the morning sun filled the modest living room, highlighting the freshly painted walls and the simple but comfortable furniture. Maria served coffee as Ethan spread out the documents on the small dining table. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the warm mug as she listened intently. "These are all the final details for the house," Ethan explained, sliding the papers toward her. "The deed is in your name, and the utilities are set up. You won't have to worry about anything for a while. I've covered the initial costs." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the papers, her eyes scanning the neatly typed words. "This still doesn't feel real," she murmured. "It's like I'm dreaming, and any second, I'll wake up and find myself back in that hotel." Ethan reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. "This is real, Maria," he said gently. "You've been through enough. It's time for you and the kids to have some stability." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "I've been trying to find the right words, but nothing feels like enough." "You don't need to thank me," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "Just focus on building a life here. That's all I want." As the day unfolded, Ethan helped Maria organize the house, unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. Noah and Lily were full of energy, darting from room to room as they explored their new home. Their excitement was contagious, and even Maria found herself laughing as she watched them play. At one point, Noah ran up to Ethan, holding a drawing he had made. "Look," he said proudly, holding up the paper. "It's our new house." Ethan crouched down, taking the drawing with a smile. It was a simple sketch, crayon lines forming the shape of the house, with stick figures of Maria, Noah, Lily, and even Ethan himself standing out front. "This is amazing, Noah," Ethan said, his voice warm. You've got some real talent." Noah beamed, his chest puffing out with pride. "You should keep it," he said, "so you don't forget us." Ethan's smile faltered slightly, a pang of emotion hitting him unexpectedly. "I won't forget you," he promised, folding the drawing carefully and slipping it into his pocket. "Not ever." As the afternoon sun began to wane, Ethan found himself sitting on the porch with Maria, a comfortable silence settling between them. The kids were still playing in the yard, their laughter a steady background to their conversation. "Do you ever think about what's next for you?" Maria asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" Maria shrugged, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've done so much for us, risked so much. But I can't help wondering, what happens now? Do you just go back to your life and pretend none of this happened?" Ethan leaned back, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. He thought about her question, the weight of it settling over him. "I don't think I can go back to how things were," he admitted. "This whole experience, it's changed me. I've spent so much of my life building walls, keeping people out, but helping you and the kids, it's made me realize there's more to life than just business and success." Maria turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "So, what are you going to do?" Ethan smiled faintly, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation," he said. "Something that can help families like yours, people who just need a second chance. It feels right." Maria's smile widened, her eyes shining with admiration. "You'd be amazing at that," she said. "And you help so many people." Ethan chuckled softly. "Well, I've had some good inspiration," he said, nodding toward the yard where Noah and Lily were playing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan stood to leave. Maria walked him to his car, her gratitude evident in every word she spoke. "You've given us more than a house or safety," she said as they stood by the car. "You've given us hope, and for that, we'll always be thankful." Ethan smiled, his hand resting on the car door. "You don't owe me anything, Maria," he said. "Just live a life worth living. That's all I ask." Maria nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "We will," she promised. "I won't let this chance go to waste." As Ethan drove away, he felt a strange mixture of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a lingering sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. The small folded drawing in his pocket reminded him of what truly mattered. It wasn't about wealth or power. It was about connection, kindness, and the ability to make a difference in someone else's life. And as the lights of the city came into view, Ethan knew that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. And now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this story touched your heart the most? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. And of course, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives like this. Each subscription helps us continue bringing exciting stories to you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.